The Green Bay Packers did not hire Jim Leonhard despite the reported mutual interest over the weekend. In fact, just hours after we got those reports, the Packers reportedly hire Jonathan Gannon to be the defensive coordinator to replace Jeff Hafley.
You are Locked On Packers, your daily Green Bay Packers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Packers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Peter Bukowski, and I cover the Packers for The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you get podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, Google, wherever you get podcasts, you'll find Locked On Packers, the number one Packers podcast on the internet, and the show for fans who know what happened. They want to know why and how. Thanks to everyone who makes Locked On Packers their first listen every day. We hope you like starting your day with us as much as we like starting our day with you here on Locked On, the number one podcast network for sports. It was not Jim Leonhard, as we suspected it would be when we had this discussion on Friday. And I want to talk about what this means moving forward, that Jonathan Gannon is going to be the defensive coordinator. I want to talk about what it means that the coaching cycle is so genuinely screwed up that a defensive coordinator who might have wanted this job and a Packers team that might have wanted that defensive coach could not ultimately even engage because of the way this is all structured. But we have to start with Jonathan Gannon and what this means for this Packers defense. And let's start here. If you had told me 2 weeks ago that the Packers were going to hire Jonathan Gannon as their defensive coordinator, I would have told you, yuck. The way that it ended in Philly, a lot of Eagles fans wanted him out the door. And we all saw the Hard Knocks clips. We all saw what that looked like. He is potentially an interesting guy, let's say. And the more I talk to people, and we started doing this last week, right? If you were listening on the show last week, I opened with, hey, Jonathan Gannon is a real contender for this job. By the way, we told you that last week on this show because that's what I had heard. And that every person that I talked to about Jonathan Gannon that either had a connection to him or actually knew him raved about Jonathan Gannon. Someone who actually knows him. I asked about Gannon. The word that they used that sticks out to me was detail. Derek Carher had this great stat. Last year, the Cardinals had among the fewest coverage busts in the NFL. They are a disciplined, detailed defense. Cody Alexander, Coach A, who's been on this show a million times, called Jonathan Gannon's defense last year the most unpredictable unit in the NFL. They played this amoeba style of defense. They played with three safeties a ton. It was basically three high. And then they could morph, and they would usually morph into two high, but they could bring both guys down. You don't know which safety's moving. You don't know where he's moving to. It was a genuinely confusing and effective defense until they just ran out of players. And they didn't have very many players to begin with. That's the thing, is you can't compare what the Eagles defense was and what the Packers defense was. And that's like apples to, like, it's like green apples to red apples. The Eagles defense in 2022 compared to what he's had in Arizona the last couple seasons is like apples and crowbars. Like, we're not even in the same zip code talking about those two things. So we have to have that part of this clear. I also want to address this, the clip that has been sent back around. Remember, this is from October 8th. So we're 5 weeks into the season. The defense was number one in EPA per play through three quarters. And then I think it was 30th in EPA per play in the fourth quarter. And it would be easy to go, well, Matt LaFleur wanted continuity. But what happened was, by the end of the season, they were just below average. They were, I think they were 24th overall or something like that at the end of the year through three quarters. And I believe it was 24th. And that's because overall the defense just was not very good. But also, they did not have very many good players. And they had to make do with what they had, which was not that many players. Their best players were in and out of the lineup. Their best player last year was 48-year-old Calais Campbell. He wasn't really that old, but by defensive line standards, defensive linemen tend to age in dog years. And yet we've seen Jonathan Gannon get the most out of aging veterans before. He did that in 2022 with the Eagles. Ultimately, the question that you have to ask is, did you hire someone who is capable of, captaining a defense that can get you to a Super Bowl? The answer unequivocally is yes, because he did it. And I do think there is some of this where Matt LaFleur was looking to recreate the Jeff Hafley effect, in that Jeff Hafley had been a head coach. Yes, in college, but had been a head coach. And so now you have someone else who's been in those spots, who's made those calls. This was what I was talking about with the offensive coordinator. He needs someone who's closer to a peer to him. And by the way, Rob Bukowski reported that there are still potential changes to the coaching schedule and coaching staff in the offing here. But when I look at that 2022 Eagles team, they had 3 players. We go, oh, it was a loaded group. Jordan Davis was a baby. He was a rookie and did not even play that much that first season. Milton Williams was not anywhere near the player that he was in 2024 and then in 2025. Brandon Graham was Brandon Graham, but they had 3 Pro Bowl players: James Bradbury at corner, Darius Slay at corner, and Hassan Reddick as a pass rusher. And Hassan Reddick was great. That's the best year of his career. That was also the last good year James Bradbury played in the NFL. He was out of the NFL 2 years later. Out of the NFL 2 years later. Javon Hargrave, that was the last season he was a useful NFL player. He has been a below average NFL player every year since. Fletcher Cox was on his last legs. They did not have great linebacker play. They did not have even good safety play. So I think that the quote unquote talent of that group is a little bit overstated. I also think it's worth pointing out, in 2023, after he left, that same defense fell off a cliff. They fell off a cliff. They set a franchise record in sacks, were almost as good as the 85 Bears sacking the quarterback. And the next year, the defense cost them everything. The defense was an abomination. But they wanted to play the same style. Sean Desai came to run the Vic Fangio defense, and then they had to replace Sean Desai with actual Vic Fangio. And then, after making significant changes to the corner room, adding Jalen Carter, and bringing over Zach Bond, who became an all-pro in that defense, then things changed. Only then did things change. So I think that's worth noting here too. What Jonathan Gannon did last year was adapt to everything that they had going on. They played college-style defense because they kind of had to. They moved a former top pick at inside linebacker outside because he'd been so disappointing as an inside linebacker. Their linebacker play was bad. The Packers have actual talent with Edgerrin Cooper at linebacker. This is easily the best safety room Jonathan Gannon has ever had. I would expect to see some of the Joe Barry, Vic Fangio stuff where they show too high and they rotate a guy down. It doesn't stay too high. They're going to play plenty of too high coverages too. This is going to be a lot more quarters based than it has been in the past. And so if you want to get excited about this group, think of Jonathan Bullard, Evan Williams, and Xavier McKinney all on the field at the same time. Great. And my guess is they're going to go back to the odd front, 3 down linemen, Micah Parsons as a stand-up linebacker, probably where he's best. You're going to see him again lined up all over the place. And we saw him. He got a good season out of Josh Sweat last year after they paid him in free agency, reuniting Sweat with Gannon. Hassan Reddick had the best year of his career under Jonathan Gannon, before or since. That was the first time that he had been locked down as an outside pass rusher and just been an ass kicker. I said last week, I reiterated it on social media that I would be higher on a Jonathan Gannon hire than most fans would be, precisely because I'm not as wedded to the idea of Jim Leonhard in this defense as everyone else seems to be. I would have hired Jim Leonhard. Let's be clear about this. That would have been my preference. But I think this is a keep the train on the tracks sort of hire. I don't think you're going to see a significant downturn in this defense next year. And the discipline part, the detail part, he's not going to get the cornerbacks to catch the ball. He's not going to get Xavier McKinney to catch the ball. Those guys just have to make those plays. But I like that he has experience. And I'll add, Nick Rallis, who was the defensive coordinator in Arizona, is seen as someone who could be a future head coach. If he brings him in a senior role, I would like this even more, because I think the linebacker play was not where it needed to be last year. I think they would just say, hey, Jeff, even if you want to take him for a lateral move, Sean Duggan, he can go, I know he's not going to be your defensive coordinator. He can go be your linebackers coach. You can have him. Take him. Now, what do you need to do personnel-wise to make this fit? I think much the same that you were already going to do, but let's talk about that next. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at Prize Picks. The big game is almost here, and there's no better way to stay locked into the moment than with Prize Picks, the daily fantasy app where it always feels good to be right. With football season coming down to its final stretch, now's the perfect time to close it out strong. Prize Picks makes watching the game even more exciting by letting you build simple lineups around player projections, no drafts, no waiting, just football action all through the playoffs. Prize Picks is incredibly easy to get started. Pick 2 or more players and choose more or less than their projections. And it's not just NFL. You can do it in the NBA because they're going to be playing a lot longer than the NFL is going to be playing. You love being able to mix stars from different teams and build lineups that fit how you watch the game. Plus, the new social feed makes it fun to follow friends, share lineups, and get inspiration from other Prize Picks players. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDON for $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. What if sports were traded like markets? Now you can put your sports IQ to work in real time with Robinhood prediction markets. It's not you against the house. It's you participating in a live market. You can buy or sell your positions live all game long. Use your sports knowledge in the moments that matter. Robinhood prediction markets change the game. It's people moving the action. So when momentum shifts, you can move with it. I always knew the game, but never had a dynamic way to apply that knowledge. Now I can actually take part live in a market powered by people. You're no longer just a spectator. Play by play, you decide. Trade every play with Robinhood. Now available across the U.S. Download the Robinhood app now to begin. Futures and cleared swaps trade involving significant risk and is not appropriate for everyone. Event contracts are offered by Robinhood Derivatives LLC, a registered future commission merchant and swap firm. In the group chat, a lot of talk about Jonathan Gannon. Why are you not in the group chat if you're not in the group chat? Come hang out with us and be an Everydayer Club member. LockedOnPackers.supercast.com will get you access to the group chat plus access to ad-free Locked On Packers. So what needs to change here? Well, the Packers already have their A pass rusher. I think they already have their B pass rusher in Lucas Van Ness. I think that he is going to be someone that can take a big step here in this defense, not just because I think that he's a good fit for Jonathan Gannon, what he's doing. I think it's more just this is the time. He was ready to take a big step and in fact did when he played last year, take a big step. He is good enough. What you need is this defensive front. And that was going to be true no matter what. I think you need, especially because this is a defense that's going to feature more too high coverage, you're going to need some beef inside. Pause. They were already going to focus heavily on this defensive front, but you need some dudes. And if you're going to go back to a 3-man front, you need a real nose tackle. I don't think Nazir Stackhouse proves anything this year in terms of what you're going to get from him. I don't think he's proven he can be a starter at nose tackle in an odd front. You need someone who can eat up reps and blockers. And this is not something we've talked about yet. We haven't switched into full off-season mode yet, but this is not a good draft. It is not a good draft, especially at the top. There's maybe 10, 15 first-round players in this class. If you're not going to have a first-round pick, this is the year to not have a first-round pick. And so for the Packers, how much are you really missing by not having that first-round pick? I would not be surprised if the Packers took 2 defensive linemen, though, on day 2. They need a premium nose tackle to make this work. Now, when you go back and you look at the body types that those Eagles defense had played with, they had Javon Hargrave, but he's not a space eater. He is someone who can penetrate and make plays in the backfield. So you don't need to get someone who's just going to TJ Slayton it, sit there and eat blocks. But this is a group, especially on day 2, where you can get nose tackles in this draft class. You need to add some beef to this defensive front because you're going to need to be able to play more top down, which means keeping those linebackers free and giving safeties time to come down and be part of the run fit. So you're going to have to add some real juice to the interior of this defensive line. Now, at the same time, you look at that Eagles team, they were one of the best pass defenses in the NFL. They were able to just rotate bodies in and have that sort of rotation. They don't need to do that the same sort of way with this Packers team, but they're not going to be able to do that. So you're probably going to need to add an edge rusher in all of this, though I think Brenton Cox is a nice player. I think that this is a better schematic fit for someone like Colin Oliver as a 3-4 outside linebacker. And remember what I said earlier about what Cody Alexander said, that this is the most unpredictable defense in the NFL. They're going to be a disguised defense. That's part of the DNA of what this team is. And you go back and we talked about this last week. Jonathan Gannon has been around and played a number of different styles of defense. They're not going to blitz that much, though they did blitz last year more on early downs than Jeff Hafley did. This is still ultimately going to be a collaboration with Matt LaFleur, but I think Matt LaFleur really wanted someone whose hand he did not have to hold. You just let Jonathan Gannon handle this. And so that's going to mean player acquisition too. Who are the kinds of players that you want to add to this group? The second part, and I think this is just as important, is the cornerback position. You're going to have to see if Nate Hobbs can play on the boundary because you want to get Javon Bullard on the field more. I think you're going to see more dime. This is a trend, by the way, around the league that Jeff Hafley was not a part of. The Packers played as much base as anyone last year. We're seeing more and more teams. The Rams in particular are a great example of this. They played more dime defense. It's not nickel on third down, it's dime. It's not base on early downs, it's nickel. But you have to be able to do something stopping the run if you're going to do that. So in order to play the pass, you have to be able to stop the run. This is I understand the consternation about this. This is still going to be a defense that is going to be bend but don't break. So what you have to be able to do is win on early downs, which is why we saw Jonathan Gannon and Nick Rallis lean into run blitzes on early downs, try and create some negative plays to get into 3rd and 8+ so that your pass rushers can go to work. Now, the Cardinals did not have pass rushers who could win one-on-one consistently. The Packers do. That's Micah Parsons. So does that mean more Edgerrin Cooper as a blitzer? I think it might. So you need to figure out what's going on in coverage. Your corners in quarters, they're not going to give up big plays with the safeties in too high, but there are going to be times when it's Carrington Valentine locked on the backside one-on-one. Can you win? It's going to be Keyshawn Nixon locked on the backside one-on-one. Can you win? Are those guys good enough? I don't think they are at this point. I think it was okay to go into last year and say, let's see what they can do. We've seen it. And we've seen enough. So even if Nate Hobbs can play, I still think you're a corner short. You don't have the depth that you need there. There are some players out there who can help the Packers in free agency, but corners are expensive. So what can you get in the draft? Most rookie corners are bad. How do you find that line? Now, I do think someone like Trayvon Diggs can be part of the solution here. At the very least, someone you just bring in and say, well, let's see what he can do. Let's see what he looks like. I would bring him in on a prove it deal and then see, because I think the upside here is still someone who can give you something as a turnover creator, someone who's going to catch the ball when it is thrown right to him. Now, if you want to give me, you want me to give you a name, there's one name I already have circled. Maybe we'll come back to this. Maybe we won't. Christian Miller, defensive tackle for the Georgia Bulldogs. We know the Packers love Georgia Bulldogs. That is a name, defensive tackle, who is someone that I would keep an eye on. Big Citrus at Iowa State is another one. There are some day 2 nose tackles that I think we can just, like, that's where I'm going to start my draft prep, is with these space-eating defensive tackles, because I think everything else is workable after that. You need guys who are going to play aggressive, who are going to have that fire in your gut. I know you want to joke about that, but like, you need that. And I think there are going to be some changes to this defensive staff as we move forward here. We'll see what that looks like. And I think that may change the way this is viewed as well. There's an account. It's an anonymous account because he used to work for the Eagles. It's called Honest NFL. And I retweeted the tweet that he sent out, but I'll just read it here. He used to work for the Eagles, again, with Jonathan Gannon. He said, very interesting hire by the Packers. I always enjoyed watching the 2022 defense play. They were the best quarters team in the league, in my opinion. Super sounding coverage for 95% of the season. Gannon is a very big believer in the Aranda Roberts approach to defense. By the way, Dave Aranda, once upon a time seen as a potential future NFL head coach. Gannon is a very big believer in the Aranda Roberts approach to defense. And from a purely theoretical perspective, he's a forward thinking. He is really forward thinking with great ideas. If he brings Rallis with him as the linebackers coach, I'd like to hire that much more. See, Gannon took a big leap as a play caller from 2021 to 2022. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out with 3 seasons without it. What really excites me is the potential for Micah Parsons' production. Okay. I think that there is real potential here. This is not gonna win the press conference. This is not gonna win social media. I think the biggest difference between Jeff Hafley and Jonathan Gannon is at the podium as a guy. He's not going to be as impressive as Jeff Hafley, but ultimately the approaches to defense are not that dissimilar. And what you need to have is someone who's willing to change, who's willing to adapt. And that is what Jonathan Gannon can do. Now, the Packers did not hire Jim Leonhard. And we can't talk about this and not talk about that part of it. We'll do that next. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at Indeed. If you've ever hired someone who looks good on paper but wasn't the right fit, you know how important that fit piece is. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed sponsored jobs. Hiring? Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs puts your post at the top of the page to help you reach the right candidates faster. Instead of struggling to get your post seen, Indeed sponsored jobs helps your listing stand out and reach quality candidates faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed are 90% more likely to report a hire than non-sponsored jobs. Spend more time interviewing candidates who check all the boxes with less stress, less time, and more results using Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to give your job the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL right now to support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. The Packers did not hire Jim Leonhard. Why did they not hire Jim Leonhard? Well, they couldn't even talk to Jim Leonhard. And it is worth wondering if Leonhard hadn't left them at the altar once, if they make this move. Now, according to the reporting, there were several other teams, at least 2 other teams, that wanted to hire Gannon, and the Packers felt like they couldn't wait. If they waited any longer, you might miss out on Gannon. And then if Jim Leonhard decides to take a different job, you're SOL. And you can't be left holding the bag at the end of this cycle and not have one of the guys you wanted. I think they saw Gannon and Leonard as pretty similar. And they ultimately made the more efficient hire. But that's an indictment of the system, because the Packers had to make this decision without even getting the chance to interview Jim Leonhard. The NFL system is not as bad as college football, where coaches are going to leave a playoff team, in the case of Lane Kiffin, to go take another job. But what is silly is that the Packers could not even talk to Jim Leonhard without having to make a decision because Jonathan Gannon was going to be hired. I think the system needs to be that you cannot officially hire anyone until after the Super Bowl. Let everything happen, let the season end, and then go through your process. It would still lead to the same way that, like, legal tampering, theoretically, you're not allowed to talk to the guys until the tampering period starts. But we all know as soon as the legal tampering period starts, the deals are done. Amazing how that works, right? You just can't continue with this the way that it is. And maybe it's as simple as you can't even interview coaches until after the season. Because that would, like, you can't even reach out. I think that would make this all a lot better. Now, it doesn't, the teams that, for example, fire a coach mid-season, they can start their search in earnest at that point. Anyone who's not employed could be interviewed. In fact, you could hire a coach right then and there if you wanted. And like the Titans could have hired Mike McCarthy, who's now the Steelers coach. They could have hired Mike McCarthy in December if they wanted to. I think that's a bad system. And so the fact that if it's true that there was mutual interest between the Packers and Jim Leonhard, if Jim Leonhard was interested in being the Packers defensive coordinator, and of course he would. He's a Wisconsin kid. His family still lives in Wisconsin. Why would he not want to be the defensive coordinator for the Packers? This is one of the Tony jobs in the NFL, one of the blue blood franchises of the NFL. But there was also reporting that John Harbaugh wanted to take Jim Leonhard with him to the Giants. That was reported before John Harbaugh had even signed the contract in New York. So if there were two jobs that he was going to have to decide between, the Packers might have been in a situation where they would have had to get in a bidding war with the Giants, and they didn't want to do that. Now, I was told the Packers, and this is related to the point about coaching salaries, that they're going to make Jonathan Gannon one of the highest paid defensive coordinators, if not the highest paid defensive coordinator in the NFL. So they felt strongly about Jonathan Gannon. I don't want it to be made to seem like the Packers made a secondary hire, that they took their second choice because they didn't want to wait for Jim Leonhard. But the system forced them to not be able to wait for Jim Leonhard. And that's a bad system, period. So they need to make some changes here. They need to figure out a better way to do all of this. But again, I don't want that to undercut the belief that the Packers have in Gannon. I think they hired Jonathan Gannon because they thought he would make a really, really good defensive coordinator for the Green Bay Packers. I happen to think that they're right about that. I still would have wanted to hire Jim Leonhard. I certainly would have wanted to interview Jim Leonhard. And what's interesting is we got all this reporting. Rob Domofsky said he didn't think the Packers would make a decision until they talked to Jim Leonhard. Well, the market said otherwise. The market said, you got to make a decision right now. So that just tells you this is a bad decision. If teams cannot go through a thorough process, one of the reasons why we have bad coaching hires in the NFL is because you don't have a choice if you're a team. You don't truly have a choice. You risk losing quality candidates who are available now. Like maybe no one is going to hire Clint Kubiak, who is someone that a lot of teams, including Packer fans, wanted their teams to hire. And that's because no team is going to be able to hire him probably until we're recording this before the NFC Championship games, because we're live on YouTube, until the Super Bowl, probably. And if not Kubiak, then Shula. Shula might not get a job. Kubiak might not get a job because everyone's going to feel like they had to move. It's also possible that Sean Payton told Jim Leonhard, hey, Vance Joseph is going to get this Cardinals job. And if he does, I want you to be the DC. Well, if you're Jim Leonhard, there is a continuity bit there. You know these players. You have Pat Surtain, you have Nick Bonito, you have a lot of really good players on that Denver defense. They were one of the best defenses in the NFL this season. The known is valuable. So it's possible Jim Leonhard just was not able to commit to the Packers, that you reach out, you back channel, you talk to the agent, and the agent says, well, yeah, he'd be interested, but like other teams are interested too. That's the agent's job to do that. And you would hate it if it was in fact the case that the agent kind of outmaneuvered Leonhard out of this job, if it was a job he really wanted, but that's the game. The game is the game. So this system stinks. The Packers made what they felt like was the best decision for them given a stinky system. If it's a bad hire, it's a bad hire. And if Jim Leonhard stays in Denver and it comes out later, yeah, he actually really wanted that Packers job, and Gannon doesn't work out, then it is going to be an indictment of the Packers and their impatience, because they will have made a rash decision. But I'm here to tell you, from everything that I've heard about Gannon, he is a really well-respected coach and is someone that I think can push this defense in a new direction and potentially be a better defense in 2026 than they were in 2025. Do I think he's a better coach than Jeff Hafley? I don't know. But I know that defense in Philly is better than any defense that the Packers have had in a long time. And I don't think the talent, if you just stack player for player, it's talented in different ways. But if you just look player for player, I don't know that it's that different. I really don't. I mentioned 3 Pro Bowl players on that defense. Well, the Packers have 3 Pro Bowl players currently on this defense. And Evan Williams is a Pro Bowl caliber player. Edgerrin Cooper is a Pro Bowl caliber player. Can you add 1 or 2 more pieces to the defensive line? Can you add some depth at corner? This is a team that can go win the Super Bowl next year as is. Can you just make it a little bit better? I think they can, but they've got work to do. And we're going to follow all of it as we move through the week. We'll get more insight on Jonathan Gannon. I'm going to have Alex Clancy from Locked On Cardinals join us this week. I'm going to have Louis DiBiase from Locked On Eagles join us this week to get some more insight into what Jonathan Gannon can do. I'm going to get Coach A, Cody Alexander from Match Quarters to join us here, because they're going to be playing a lot more match quarters. I'm telling you that. It's going to be a lot more man match this year in Green Bay. So what does that look like? We'll talk to all of them about it as we move forward here in the off season. Thanks for tuning in to Locked On Packers. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast wherever you get podcasts. Subscribe on YouTube, please. Then you can come hang out with us live like we are right now here on YouTube. If you never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club is built for you. Get Locked On Packers ad-free, plus members-only group chat access and more. Head to lockedonpackers.supercast.com. It's in the show notes. For those of you on video, we go to the Locked On NFL YouTube page, the first 24/7 national NFL YouTube channel. On audio, make Locked On NFL your second listen. Go check out Locked On Packers, the Squad Show, so you can stay Locked On Packers.